I'm Rebecca Collins, 29 years old, and despite years of building a career and a life of my own, I've never been more than an afterthought in my parents' eyes. On a quiet April night, I stood in the dim hallway of my childhood home, hearing my father's voice carry low and certain from the kitchen. "Don't worry," he told my brother, "we'll make your sister pay for everything." Those words stopped me cold, cutting through the stillness like a blade. The air felt heavier, my pulse quickening, as I realized I was hearing something I was never meant to know. Before the weekend was over, my life and my connection to this family would change for good. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to stand your ground against the very people who should have stood with you. I grew up in a small Pennsylvania suburb where houses sat close together, lawns were neatly edged, and neighbors waved from their porches. My father Richard kept steady hours at an accounting firm downtown, while my mother Margaret worked the sales floor at a department store in the mall. From the outside, we were the picture of a solid middle-class family. Inside, the balance was never even. As the firstborn, I was given the unspoken role of the capable one, the one who should already know better, do better, and need less. When I brought home an A, my father wanted to know why it wasn't an A+. If I placed second in a school competition, my mother would wonder aloud why I hadn't worked harder for first. When my brother Ethan came along 5 years younger and all bright eyes and easy charm, the rules shifted. He got themed bedrooms with new furniture and the latest toys, while my space stayed the same, filled with plain hand-me-downs. Holidays and birthdays followed the same pattern. My gifts leaned toward what was useful, while his were chosen to delight. "Your brother's still little," my mother would say. "Boys need more encouragement," my father added, as though that settled it. By the time I was 10, I was washing dishes, folding laundry, and keeping my room immaculate. Ethan could leave a trail of snack wrappers and toys across the living room, and no one asked him to clean up. As the years passed, my responsibilities grew. At 12, I was the built-in babysitter whenever my parents went out. By 14, I was saving for a second-hand laptop to help with school, only to watch Ethan unwrap a brand-new gaming computer without even asking. At 16, I took a part-time job at the grocery store to afford what my parents freely gave him in allowance. "It builds character," my father said, as though it were a gift, to make me work for my own needs while covering Ethan's without hesitation. By the time I left for college on a partial scholarship that still left me working 2 jobs to cover the rest, I'd learned not to expect anything beyond the bare minimum. I earned my degree in finance, secured an internship in New York, and eventually built a career with long hours, careful saving, and no safety net but my own discipline. Visits home were polite but hollow, filled with updates about Ethan's newest plans and purchases, while my achievements were met with brief nods before the conversation drifted back to him. That April weekend, I'd returned for my mother's 56th birthday, the first time in months I'd made the trip. I thought I knew how these visits went. Surface-level pleasantries, the usual tilt toward my brother. But that night's overheard words told me something different was coming. What I didn't know yet was just how far they were willing to go, or how quickly I'd have to decide exactly where I stood. That April weekend had begun like every other visit home in recent years: cordial greetings, surface-level conversation, and the unspoken rhythm of everyone's attention leaning toward my younger brother. My mother's birthday was the reason I'd made the trip this time, and by the end of Friday evening, I'd already noticed the familiar dynamic settling into place. The next day was meant to be the real celebration, but as I carried my overnight bag upstairs that first night, the quiet weight of the house felt different. After unpacking in the guest room that had replaced my old bedroom, I heard the front door open and close below. A low murmur of voices followed, too soft to make out at first. I stepped into the hallway, pausing when my father's voice rose just enough to carry. "Don't worry," he told Ethan. "We'll make your sister pay for everything." I froze where I stood, one hand resting lightly on the banister. Ethan's answer came after a pause. "Rebecca." There was no shock in his tone, only a hint of uncertainty. My father continued without hesitation, his words measured and sure. "She has the income, the condo, the savings. She can take out a loan in her name. She'll qualify without a problem. We'll tell her it's for a family business." The air seemed to shift around me, the dim light from the hallway fixture casting shadows across the walls. Ethan asked, "And if she wants to see numbers or talk to an advisor?" My father gave a short laugh. "We'll make it sound important, make her feel included. She's always wanted that. It'll cloud her judgment." A third voice entered, then my mother's. "What are you two talking about?" My father didn't falter. "Just the plan for Rebecca. James's debts are more than we thought." She let out a quiet sigh. 40,000, right. My father confirmed. "She's done well for herself," my mother said evenly. "It's time she helped her brother." They spoke with the kind of ease people use when discussing something inevitable. I listened until I could no longer stand to hear my name paired with their scheme, then stepped back into the guest room and closed the door without a sound. The room was dim except for the faint glow from the street lamp outside, and I stood there for a long moment, my hand still on the doorknob. Sitting down on the edge of the bed, I thought through what I'd just heard. The words had been plain, no room for misunderstanding. I reached for my suitcase, slowly placing the few things I'd unpacked back inside. My mother's birthday gift remained on the dresser. I wouldn't take back something I'd already given. On a notepad from a hotel in Boston, I wrote a short message. Had an emergency at work. Needed to return to New York early. Happy birthday. I set it beside the wrapped package. I waited until the house settled into deep silence. At 2:30 in the morning, Ethan's door shut across the hall. By 3, the only sound was my father's faint snoring from down the hall. I picked up my bag, slid on my shoes, and stepped into the hallway, careful to avoid the one stair that had always creaked. Downstairs, the living room sat in shadow, familiar shapes, softened by the dark. At the front door, I hesitated just long enough to glance back into the quiet house. There was no sense of leaving something behind, only the certainty that this would be the last time I crossed that threshold. I closed the door gently and walked to the rental car waiting in the driveway. The road was empty as I made my way toward the interstate. 20 minutes later, I pulled into the parking lot of a hotel near the airport, choosing a place where no one in town would think to look for me. The night clerk processed my check-in with little more than a glance, sliding the key card across the counter. Inside the room, I set my suitcase on the stand and pulled my laptop from the front pocket. I logged into my primary bank account and moved most of the balance to an account at a separate bank one my family didn't know existed. On my credit cards, I added extra verification steps and placed a temporary freeze on new charges. I emailed my financial advisor requesting an urgent meeting to review every account and add further protections. I also searched for attorneys specializing in financial security and identity protection, sending a detailed inquiry to the one with the strongest reviews. By the time daylight began to filter through the thin curtains, I'd taken the first steps to secure my finances. Sleep was impossible, so I ordered breakfast to the room and sat by the window while I ate. My phone lit up around 9 with the first message from my mother, then my father, and finally Ethan. I didn't open any of them. At 11, I checked out and drove to the airport, paying the flight change fee without hesitation. Sitting at the gate, I thought about the weekend that had barely begun and the visit that had already ended. The ache in my chest was sharp, but it was no longer tied to hope for something better from them. It was tied to the clarity of knowing exactly where I stood. That evening, I unlocked the door to my condo in Brooklyn. The rooms were quiet, the air cool from the windows I'd left slightly open. I set my bag down and walked slowly from room to room, letting the familiarity settle around me. This space had been built piece by piece with my own effort, and now it would stand as the barrier between my life and the people who had tried to claim it. Tomorrow there would be calls to return, meetings to arrange, and decisions to make about how to move forward. But tonight I sat in the chair by the window watching the city lights and listening to the steady hum of traffic below. I knew that what I had overheard would shape the days ahead in ways I couldn't yet see, but one thing was certain: the next step would be mine alone to take. The next morning, I woke to pale light filtering through the blinds and a quiet room that smelled faintly of brewed coffee from the hallway. I stayed in bed for a moment, the events of the night before pressing into my thoughts with a heavy stillness. My phone sat on the nightstand, its screen dark, but I knew without looking that there would be messages waiting. By the time I showered and dressed, the hotel lobby had grown busier, travelers wheeling suitcases toward the automatic doors, while others lingered near the breakfast area. I checked out quickly, carrying my bag to the rental car. The drive back to New York felt longer than usual, each mile giving me more space to think about what I had heard and what it meant. When I reached my condo, the familiar hum of the refrigerator and the faint echo of the street below greeted me. I set my suitcase inside the door and went straight to my desk, powering up my laptop. My financial advisor, Patricia Lang, had already replied to my late-night email suggesting a video call that afternoon. I confirmed immediately, then began gathering the documents she might need: account summaries, recent statements, and the passwords I planned to change. At 3 o'clock, Patricia's face appeared on the screen, her expression calm but focused. I explained what I had overheard, keeping my tone even. She listened without interrupting, jotting notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she adjusted her glasses and leaned closer. "We'll start with added security on every account," she said. "Verbal passwords, two-factor authentication, and removing your parents as emergency contacts. If they try to access anything, it will raise a flag immediately." For the next hour, we went through each account one by one, setting new protocols and locking down anything that could be exploited. She suggested I place a freeze with all 3 credit bureaus to prevent new loans from being taken out in my name. "It's not permanent," she said. "You can lift it temporarily if you need to, but this way no one can act without your consent." I agreed without hesitation. After we ended the call, I opened my email to find a reply from the attorney I had contacted, Angela Rivera. She offered a consultation later that evening and included a secure link for the meeting. I spent the next 2 hours compiling a detailed timeline of events, from the years of financial imbalance to the conversation I'd overheard the night before. I included specific dates, quotes, and any evidence I had: emails, old text messages, and photos of certain documents from past family discussions. At 7:30, I clicked the link to join the consultation. Angela appeared in a tidy office lined with bookshelves. Her voice was steady, her questions precise. She asked me to recount exactly what had been said in the kitchen, word for word, if possible. I repeated the conversation as I remembered it, noting each person's tone and reactions. Angela nodded slowly. "The most important thing is to create a clear record," she said. "If they attempt anything, you'll already have evidence showing premeditation." She advised me to save all communications from my family going forward, even if I chose not to respond. "If it's legal in your state," she added, "consider recording conversations. The more you have, the stronger your position will be." We discussed possible next steps, including sending a formal notice through her office if the situation escalated. Before ending the call, she encouraged me to stay consistent in my boundaries. The rest of the weekend passed in quiet, my phone vibrating now and then with calls I didn't answer. I focused on completing the changes Patricia and Angela had recommended: new email passwords, updated beneficiary information, and additional security on my investment accounts. By Sunday night, I felt a measure of control return, though the tension of what lay ahead was never far. On Monday morning, I sent a request for personal leave to my manager, explaining I needed the day to handle urgent matters. Then I returned to the checklist I had made: transfer remaining funds to separate accounts, close unused credit lines, and secure my safe deposit box. Each task brought a small sense of progress, though I knew the larger confrontation was still to come. By late afternoon, the unanswered calls had grown to include a few relatives I hadn't heard from in months. I let them go to voicemail, saving each message without listening. The weight of the conversation I knew I would eventually have with my parents and Ethan hung in the air, but I wasn't ready to speak to them yet. I wanted the next step to be on my terms. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, the city lights flickering through the window. I reviewed the notes from both Patricia and Angela, reading them twice to be certain I'd covered everything. When I closed the folder, the apartment felt unusually still, as if holding its breath for what was coming. I didn't yet know how they would respond when faced with what I had to say, but I knew the time to speak was drawing close. By Tuesday morning, I knew the quiet steps I had taken over the weekend would not be enough. I needed to speak to them directly, not in passing or through unanswered messages, but in one deliberate conversation. I sent a short text to my parents: "I will call at 8 tonight. Please have Ethan there too." There was no reply, but I didn't expect one. The day moved slowly. I went into the office and worked through my usual reports, though my focus wasn't fully there. At lunch, I walked around the block, letting the cold air steady me. By the time I returned to my desk, I had rehearsed what I wanted to say, not as a script, but as a clear line I wouldn't cross. At 8 sharp, I sat at my desk at home, the glow from my laptop screen casting the room in soft light. When I started the video call, my parents' faces appeared almost immediately. My mother's lips were pressed thin, my father's expression unreadable. A moment later, Ethan joined, glancing at his phone before setting it aside. "Rebecca," my mother began, "do you have any idea how upsetting it was when you left this weekend without saying goodbye?" It was my birthday. Her tone was measured, but the edge was there. My father leaned forward slightly. "We've been trying to reach you for days. Is something wrong?" I met their eyes through the camera. "I know about Ethan's debts. I know the total amount, and I know you plan to use me to cover them." I heard the entire conversation in the kitchen Friday night. For a moment, no one spoke. My father's jaw tightened, and Ethan shifted in his chair. My mother's brows drew together. "What conversation?" she asked carefully. I repeated their words back to them: the plan for a so-called family business, the loan in my name, the idea that my wanting to be included would cloud my judgment. My father sat back, exhaling through his nose. "We were discussing possibilities," he said. Nothing was decided. My mother turned to him quickly, as if piecing together parts she hadn't known. Ethan leaned in toward the camera. "So you were eavesdropping? That's how you spend your nights here." "I was walking through my own parents' house," I said evenly, "and I heard you planning to involve me in something I never agreed to. You were deciding how to use me without my knowledge." "That's not fair," my father replied. "It was about helping the family." "Ethan made some mistakes, but family steps in when someone's struggling." I kept my voice steady. "When I was in college, I worked 2 jobs and took out loans while you saved for Ethan's education years before he graduated high school. When I needed help, you told me to figure it out. That was your choice. This is mine. I will not take on debt for him, and I will not be part of any business you create." Ethan let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "It's not like you can't afford it. You're doing fine." I looked directly at the camera. "That's not the point. My finances are mine to manage, and I've taken steps to make sure no one can access them without my permission. If any account in my name is tampered with, I will involve law enforcement." My mother's eyes widened. "You'd call the police on your own family?" I didn't hesitate. "If necessary, yes." The silence that followed was long enough for the faint sound of traffic outside my window to fill the space. My father broke it with a low-clipped tone. "You've always been selfish, Rebecca, always putting yourself before the rest of us." "I'm protecting myself," I said. "You may not like it, but it's not selfish to refuse being used." I let the words sit for a moment before adding, "If you decide to reach out again, it should be for something other than money. Otherwise, I don't see a reason to continue this conversation." Before they could answer, I ended the call. The quiet in my apartment felt different than before, not heavy but solid, as if the air itself had settled. I sat for a while, the screen now dark in front of me, knowing the calls and messages would start again. But the next move, whatever it was, would be mine. The calls and texts started again before I'd even closed my laptop that night. My phone lit up with my parents' number, then Ethan's, then numbers from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. I let every one of them go to voicemail, saving each message without listening. By the next morning, the list had grown. My Aunt Linda left a long message about how families should stick together. My cousin Michael sent a short text, just, "Are you okay?" And I responded with a simple, "I'm fine. I'll explain when I can." When I finally sat down with my coffee, I opened my email to find another message from Angela Rivera. She had drafted a formal letter that would serve as a preemptive warning, making it clear that any attempt to access my finances without permission would be considered fraud. "This can be sent now or held until you feel it's needed," she wrote. I printed a copy for my records and saved the file to a secure folder. I spent the afternoon continuing to put distance between my accounts and any possible interference. I moved my investment portfolio to a firm my family had never heard of, changed my safe deposit box location, and updated the beneficiary designations to charitable organizations instead of family members. Each step made the knot in my stomach loosen a little more. That evening, Michael called. I almost let it go to voicemail, but answered on the third ring. His voice was cautious. "I've been hearing things from your parents. I wanted to ask you directly what happened. I told him about the conversation I'd overheard about Ethan's debts and about the plan to have me take out a loan in my name." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I can't say I'm shocked. I've seen how they treat you. I'm sorry it's come to this." The next few days brought more messages from extended family, most of them carrying some version of my parents' side of the story. It was clear they had framed me as someone who had turned her back on the family during a time of need. At first I tried to respond, but the conversations quickly turned into lectures about loyalty. Eventually, I stopped answering altogether. Instead, I chose 3 people who I knew had always treated me fairly, my grandmother Rose, my cousin Michael, and my uncle David, and sent them each a detailed email. I laid out the history, the years of one-sided support, and the conversation I'd overheard in exact words. "I'm not asking you to take sides," I wrote. "I'm asking you to understand why I have to protect myself." Grandma Rose called the next afternoon. Her voice shook slightly as she told me she had seen the favoritism for years. "I spoke to your mother about it once a long time ago." She brushed it off. "I should have pushed harder." She paused. "You're doing the right thing now. Uncle David emailed me later that night, inviting me to lunch the next time I was in his part of the state. Your parents have always had blind spots when it comes to Ethan," he wrote. "I'm not surprised this is where it led. I'm on your side." Hearing their words didn't erase what had happened, but it gave me a kind of quiet reassurance I hadn't expected. I realized that even within a family where patterns run deep, there can still be people who see clearly. By Friday, I had settled back into my work routine, though my evenings were still filled with small, deliberate tasks, updating passwords, scanning important documents, and organizing the folder where I kept every piece of evidence and correspondence. The more I put in place now, the less room there would be for trouble later. That weekend, I met Lisa, my closest friend from college, for dinner. Over the years, she'd heard bits and pieces about the imbalance in my family, but never the full story. We sat in a quiet corner of the restaurant, and I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, then reached across the table. "It's not easy to walk away from people you've known your whole life," she said, "but I'm proud of you for doing it." Her words stayed with me on the walk home. I realized I wasn't just protecting my finances, I was reclaiming my ability to decide who belonged in my life and on what terms. And for the first time in days, the idea of whatever came next didn't feel like something to brace against. It felt like something I could face on my own terms. By the middle of the following week, the noise from my parents had shifted. The angry calls and accusations had quieted, replaced by a different kind of pressure. Extended family members, some I hadn't spoken to in years, were suddenly invested in convincing me to reconsider my decision. The messages varied in tone, but the goal was the same. They wanted me to make things right, though no one seemed to ask what right meant to me. One evening, I came home to find a thick envelope in my mailbox. The return address was my parents' house. Inside was a neatly typed letter 3 pages long outlining why helping Ethan would benefit the entire family. They framed it as an opportunity for me to invest in our future, offering vague promises about shared profits and eventual repayment. There was no mention of his gambling debts. I set the letter on the counter without finishing the last page. That night, I scanned it into the folder I kept for documentation, labeling it with the date and sender. Then I emailed a copy to Angela Rivera with a short note for the record. Her reply came within the hour. "This confirms intent. Keep it. Do not respond yet." 2 days later, I ran into my grandmother Rose on a video call we'd scheduled just to check in. She looked tired but resolute. "Your mother is telling people you've cut them off entirely," she said. "She's leaving out why." I told her about the letter and she nodded slowly. "It sounds like they're still hoping to pull you back in. I want you to know you don't owe them this." Her words stayed with me as I went about my week. At work, I focused on projects that needed my attention, though I found myself lingering at my desk after hours, not wanting to come home to the messages and letters waiting for me. That Friday, my Uncle David called. "Your father came to see me," he said plainly. "He's asking for a loan." I told him no. "He's angry, but I don't care. I'm telling you so you know where things stand." I thanked him for the honesty and for not getting drawn into something that wasn't his responsibility. The following Monday, Angela called to suggest one more layer of protection, a formal cease and desist letter. It would make my position clear and provide another piece of evidence should I need it. I agreed, and by Wednesday the letter was sent. It was short and direct, no personal remarks, just a statement of boundaries and the consequences for crossing them. There was silence for a few days after that. No calls, no new messages. I began to think they might have finally accepted my decision. But the quiet broke on Saturday morning when Michael texted, "You should know Ethan is telling people you refuse to help, even after they offered you part of the business." I closed my eyes for a moment before replying, "I appreciate you letting me know. I'm not engaging with it." That night I sat in the living room with the folder of documents spread out on the coffee table. The notes from Angela. The account changes Patricia had guided me through the letters, the call logs, all of it was in order. Looking at it, I realized I wasn't just defending against a single plan anymore. I was creating a barrier that would last. I didn't know what the next move from my parents or Ethan would be, but I knew the next one from me. It was time to take this protection from quiet preparation into something visible and unshakable. That step would set the tone for everything that followed. The Monday after Angela's letter went out, I walked into work with a different kind of focus. I had meetings scheduled back to back, but in the quiet moments between, my mind kept circling back to the next step. I didn't want to just defend against their plans anymore. I wanted a level of distance that could not be undone with a single phone call or unannounced visit. That afternoon, I called Angela from my office. "I think it's time to make this official," I told her. She didn't need me to explain. "You're ready for a legal separation of finances," she said. "It's not a lawsuit. It's paperwork that makes your boundaries enforceable. We scheduled a meeting for later in the week to start the process." When Thursday came, I met Angela at her Midtown office. She had the documents ready, each page clearly marked for signature or initial. "This creates a formal record that you will not co-sign loans, guarantee debts, or participate in joint ventures with these individuals," she explained. "It's as much a shield as it is a statement." I signed each page without hesitation, feeling the weight of every line I wrote my name under. That evening, I stopped by Patricia Lang's office as well. She had already been notified of the changes and had updated my accounts accordingly. "You've built a strong wall here," she said, as she handed me a folder with the updated account details. "Now you have to decide how visible you want it to be." The following weekend, I took the train to see Grandma Rose. She met me at the door with a hug that lingered longer than usual. Over tea in her kitchen, I told her about the documents, about how they meant I could finally stop worrying about what might happen next. She listened, nodding. "It's not the life you thought you'd have with your family," she said, "but it's the life you've built for yourself. And it's a good one." On the ride back, I thought about her words. It was true I hadn't imagined this kind of distance. But as the train moved along the Hudson, I realized I didn't feel loss so much as relief. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a new email. It was from Ethan. "I heard you've made things legal now. Guess that means we're done for good." There was no apology, no acknowledgement of why I'd taken these steps. I archived it without replying. Later that week, Michael called again. "I think you should know," he said, "Ethan's been talking about declaring bankruptcy. Your parents are saying it's your fault because you wouldn't help." I thanked him for telling me and told him there was nothing more I could do. That night I sat in my living room with the city lights flickering outside and the folder of signed documents on the coffee table. The papers were neat, orderly, final. I thought about the months leading to this point, the overheard conversation, the planning, the pushback, the messages. Every step had brought me here, and now for the first time in years I felt like the ground under my feet belonged only to me. In the weeks after signing the final papers, the noise from my family faded into a low, distant hum. There were no more letters, no unexpected calls, no messages from relatives trying to sway me. The absence felt strange at first, like walking into a room where a loud clock had suddenly stopped ticking. Slowly, the quiet began to feel like peace. Work filled my days, but I made space for other things too. I joined a weekend hiking group, spent more time with Lisa, and even started volunteering with a local nonprofit that taught budgeting skills to young adults. Sharing what I'd learned the hard way felt like a kind of justice, not just for me, but for anyone who'd been made to feel their worth was tied to what they could give. One afternoon, a card arrived in the mail from Grandma Rose. Inside was a handwritten note. "I'm proud of the life you've built. Don't let anyone make you doubt it." I kept it on my desk where I could see it every day. It reminded me that even in families where the balance is off, there can still be people who choose to stand beside you. Months later, Michael called to tell me Ethan had officially filed for bankruptcy. My parents had sold off most of what they could to help him. His voice was careful, as if testing my reaction. I told him I hoped Ethan found a way to rebuild, but that I couldn't be part of it. Hanging up, I felt no guilt, only a quiet gratitude that I had stepped away before their choices became my burden. Looking back, I realized the moment I overheard that late-night conversation wasn't just a turning point. It was the end of a long chapter I hadn't realized I'd been living. Every step I'd taken since then had been about drawing a clear line between the life I was born into and the one I was building. And for the first time, I knew I didn't need anyone else's permission to keep walking forward. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that protecting yourself financially, emotionally, or otherwise is not selfish. Sometimes it's the only way to make space for the life you deserve. And sometimes the family you choose will understand you in ways the one you were given never could. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. I hope if you've ever faced a moment where you needed to choose your own well-being, you found the courage to take it. If this story resonates with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences.